Bueno, listo. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por venir el día de hoy. A quienes están en esta sesión de Open House de modo virtual, muchas gracias también por su asistencia. El día de hoy, como saben, estamos con Nathan. Nathan es representante del London School of Economics. Sabemos que es una de las universidades más prestigiosas en el Reino Unido y viene precisamente a brindarnos información fundamental sobre su oferta académica, opciones de financiación, de hospedaje, becas y recomendaciones para todos si sus planes de estudio están encaminados claramente en llevar a cabo allí un posgrado. Les quiero recordar, en este sentido, Colfuturo tiene un convenio con London School of Economics. Este convenio, en términos muy generales, consta de un descuento del 20% en el costo de la matrícula para todos los beneficiarios aceptados en programas de maestría y doctorado. Y por otra parte, ofrece una beca del 100% para un estudiante del semillero de talentos de Colfuturo. Sé que específicamente en este punto dice que solo una beca del 100%, pero en los últimos años London School of Economics ha estado brindando hasta 2 becas, 2 oportunidades. Así que están todos invitados, obviamente, a participar en nuestra convocatoria, a solicitar admisión en London School y claramente este es el espacio ideal, idóneo, para que puedan resolver todas sus inquietudes directamente con Nathan. Entonces, Nathan, thank you so much for being here. We are so happy to have you there. You can go ahead.
Okay. Is that okay? Do we need to mute is that better? And then we don't hear it? Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and apologies that I'm speaking in English tonight, but hopefully that's okay. And if you have any questions, you can always let me know, and my colleagues definitely have a better grasp of Spanish than I do. So thank you. We don't take it for granted, and it's really fantastic to be back in Bogota here at COLFUTURO speaking to the people in front of me, but also the people online. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. So, plan is this evening. So I'm hopefully going to talk for no more than an hour, because let me tell you, you do not want to listen to me for more than an hour. That will drive anyone to despair. So they'll plan an hour. And within that time, we'll cover a few different things. So the first thing we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the UK in general. So, think about, what kind of study options you have, how it might look different to the studies you've already done. We'll then obviously talk about LSE. And I will provide a little bit of information then into how the scholarships work, into how the programs work. And crucially, we're going to end on the really difficult bit, which is how to get in, right? LSE is a difficult university to get into. By means of introduction, I should have said, so as I'm based at LSE in the student recruitment and study abroad team, but I always like to kind of start these sessions just by saying that I also was an LSE student. So I studied my bachelor's and my master's at LSE. In case anyone cares, that was in history. There's no future in it. That's a joke, please, thank you. At least as long as one person laughs, I'm okay. Okay, I can go home happy. So I've kind of been where you're sat now, right? In trying to figure out what was best for me and my next steps and my future. And I ended up at LSE, right? So let's start then here with this slide that looks a little bit like I'm about to talk about Brexit. Let's talk a little bit about the UK. So I think the first thing to say is that I guess the reason you're here tonight and you're tuning in online is because you might already know a little bit about LSE. And I think that says a lot about the reputation of UK universities, right? Which is no matter where you go in the world, people have heard of universities like LSE, like Oxford, like Cambridge, like UCL. So it really has, I think, such a strong reputation. I think one of the best things we have going for us as a country is our universities, right, and our education system. And actually, universities in the world are based in the UK. So it's a country with a really strong reputation, right? You know you're going to go and have an excellent experience that's recognised worldwide. But there are a few things that are different about the UK. Particularly, I would say compared to Colombia, but compared to lots of countries, we do things a little bit different in the UK. So the first thing is, and I might move around a little bit. Does that work? Is that on? Okay. So the first thing is that, so in the UK, we talk a lot about specialisation, right? which is the UK education system specialises. So what that means is if you come to the UK as an undergraduate, right, for your bachelor's degree, you've like chosen your major before you've already said, I'm just going to focus on this one area. And what this means is our students specialise quicker, meaning by the end of their degrees, they normally have a deeper understanding of the topic than elsewhere. But also means the degrees okay because it specialises faster. So we are very, very focused on you as an individual, right? Developing your ideas, developing your opinions, your research interests, right? And we talk a lot about like learn by doing. And what I really mean by that is, yes, you know, when you come to study, there'll be lectures and you will listen to an academic talk about his or her ideas, right? And you'll write notes, right? Which is in the UK system, you do a lot of work independently to develop your own research, to conduct your own research plans and interests. And then when you turn up to class, you're expected to like present your ideas, right? You're expected to arrive with your own ideas, with your own perspectives. And that's why, you know, we really, is that, okay. I can just speak to that one. No? Okay. Sorry for people online. So we really, want you to develop your own ideas. I think as well, like in comparison to other countries, one of the really amazing things about COLFUTURO is that you can go anywhere, right? You can go around South America, you can go to the UK, where comparison are useful in that obviously the education is going to be less, shorter time you have to study. And also the UK, although it is as expensive as US universities and colleges. So those are just a few things about the education, I would say to you. Aside from that, just out of interest, has anyone been to the UK? You loved it. Oh, okay, so you've done like the whole. Okay. Did you say you've gone as well? You went to the UK as well? Well, fantastic. So I'm sure there'll be some people online as well who've been, you know that, particularly in places like London, they are such diverse and international cities, right? Full of people from all around the world, with all kinds of cultures and foods and languages, no matter where you're from. It's also good laws, things like that. It makes it a pretty safe country. And many of our students who come to the UK learn parts of Europe. So, you know, if you're a student in London, you can really easily get to Cardiff or go to Manchester, go fast. And then, you know, you can go on the Eurostar and be in Paris in 2 hours, or be in Brussels in 3 hours, or Amsterdam in 4 hours. So I think the UK is obviously a very culturally rich country, access the rest of Europe. And I think this final piece on careers is obviously really important as well, which is that to study for a master's or a PhD are doing so because they're thinking about their career and they're thinking. So a couple of things to say quickly. So the first thing is that if you are a student in the UK, so on a student visa, you're allowed to work for 20 hours. It's unlimited. So many of our masters, PhD students will have full-time jobs, right? Over the breaks, over the summer, working like whatever. Universities like LSE also have very, very good post-graduation employment outcomes as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But to give you an example, in a typical year, 93 or 94 per job within about a year. Okay, and that's for UK residents, that's for Colombian. And finally, as well, if you like being in the UK, and you could see yourself like staying there for a little bit longer, building a career, exploring career options, and stay after you graduate as well. Allows you, or at least I should say, 2 years after you graduate, right? So if you wanted to like stay in London and do internships or explore jobs, you absolutely can do that. And just if you study in the USA, after you graduate, about 50 days to find a job after you graduate. And if you don't find a job within 50 days, it's like, bye, see you later. Or they put you on this strange course. This isn't tied to employment. So those 2 years are yours. If you just wanted to stay in your bedroom for 2 years, you can. It's not tied to employment. Okay, you have those 2 years to play with. So if we zoom in a bit more then, so that's the UK in general. Let's talk about London. So I'm originally from Manchester, so I'm allowed to say I absolutely love London. Manchester is horrible compared to London. Okay, do not go, do not bother. Okay, right? And that's because obviously the restaurants and whatever. And I think so. In the room, there was a few people who said they'd already been to London. And I think, even if you've been on, you might have been on vacation and you did all the tourist stuff, right? Like you go and see Buckingham Palace, take a look at some things like that. Even if you've done those being a student in London is a very different experience time, and you're there for a different reason. And people don't always realise that London is made up of students. So in total, in London, there are 600,000 students. And that means like everywhere has student discount, student events, like free drinks, a city of students. And that's one of the reasons that it's actually been ranked now for 7 years in a row as the best city in the world to be a student in, right? Because you have all of this stuff. When thinking back to when I was a student, it really means that when you join, you're not just part of the LSE. But hey,
Yes, I have a doubt about accommodation because I've seen in the website that, for example, in order to ask for the scholarships you have to request them more or less in January. I wonder if accommodation should be requested also with a long time before.
scholarships, but also accommodation. So I'll just say really quickly that absolutely. So LSE and lots of other accommodation to students. Okay, so if you're coming to us for a master's degree or a PhD, you can choose to live in a residence with other LSE students, right, who are at the same level as you, master's or PhD. But as you rightly say, places in those will fill up a little bit earlier in the year. So it normally means for accommodation in, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, it's just so you can understand what the timeline is for it. Now, if you've never been to London, I promise when you come, you are going to learn this. This, of course, is the tube map of London, TfL. And just to point out, LSE is right in the middle of the city. So about 5 minutes from Covent Garden. So if you've been to London, you definitely went to Covent Garden to go shopping, to watch a show, to eat some good food, right? So we're right in the middle of the city. But the reason is not just to show you the problem we have, okay? And this is, by the way, is a really good problem to have, but it's still a problem, right? Which is COLFUTURO is one of the best financial support scholarship options I've ever seen anywhere in the world. Okay, when I say to people that you can get 50,000 US dollars, right, to get that. And obviously with COLFUTURO, you can go and you're thinking, I really like the idea, and London sounds great. Look at the problem you have. So within a mile of LSE, there are 50 other universities. If you look as the city as a whole, there are 40. That even if you just knew, so the problem you have, like I say, and it's a good problem, but it's still a problem, is choice. Because it is really easy these days, amazing, all around the world, it's amazing universities. It's not, therefore, the problem is finding not a good one, but the right one for you, the things. So what I'm going to do now is change gears a bit and spend a bit of time now explaining how LSE is different. I completely understand that anyone from any will tell you how special they are. But LSE, we actually are. And the reason for that is because LSE is the only university in the UK and one of very few universities in the world that is specialist, only offers the social. So sadly, well, not sadly, but we don't have any medicine. We're not interested in this. The way I'd like to explain this is, of course, there's lots of universities, hundreds of universities study economics, international relations, law, but there's only one where which is how does our society work? How do we, is that often, students see LSE and they see the E for economics and they think that's all we do, right? Areas of our lives. So I always think you would be studying the kind of people you'd be working with. So to pick out a few examples, Has anyone in the room heard of Nicholas Stern? Shame on you, Dan. So Nicholas Stern, you can see on the bottom right of the screen. I'm going to make a bet with you, okay? In 50 years, this job of doing these presentations, hopefully I've changed my slides by then. But anyway, okay, if I'm still doing this in 50 years, I promise you my bet, Nicholas Stern was the first person in history anywhere in the world, and three, to climate change was going to change the world economy and how it's going to remake people's careers and jobs and their consumption habits and affect all kinds of different economic areas of our lives. So, and study climate change from a social, political, economic perspective, right? So we have someone like Peter Pomerantz there, who's in the middle, top level of the screen. And this book, by the way, is fantastic. I talk about this everywhere I go. I should get commission. Peter Pomerantz is particularly how social media affects our politics and how it affects big events around. So in this book, which is fantastic, he talks about Brexit. He talks about Trump's election. And he also talks about what we're seeing right now today, which is how do online social media communities and these platforms shape our understanding of who belongs in our group and who doesn't belong. See, the decisions we make for the direction of travel, right, in history. So it comes to us seems to be those. Then we have someone like Paul, and particularly what makes for societies where people feel happy, they feel they have value. And finally, I just wanted to flag, and hope what we do at LSE is not that is we're not only looking at UK issues, we're not only looking at European issues. Who are research. An example I've put on the screen because I was in Chile, historians of Salvador Allende and Chile throughout the Cold War, of anywhere in the world working at LSE, right, on the history of Chile and the place of Latin America. So this is all just to say there's a lot going on at LSE. And yes, you can come and study economics, but there's so many even different approaches within. A couple of other things to mention quickly. So in addition to being very specialized, we are a very small university. So we only have 12,000 students. That might sound like a lot, but for example, King's College London, which is right next door, UCL, which is up the road. So we're much, much smaller. And also importantly for this call today, you'll notice we have more than undergraduates. Right? There are more masters and PhD students at LSE than thinking about postgraduate. You would be entering into a slightly older community, right? People who are a little bit further or more along their academic careers and their life. We're small. I think it's where there is a reason I'm Chile. LSE is the most 80%, and not from the UK, which means that there are more students like you at LSE, i.e., you didn't, which is languages and the accents and points of view. And so if you do visit LSE, which I would recommend, you'll see one of the first things you see right in the middle of campus is this huge globe, right in the middle of campus. This is where everyone's on their Instagram. But I love this, right? Because one, this celebrates what an international community we are. But second, stops to seeing the map with the USA at the center, or with right at the center. And this is really asking you to think, well, what does the world not from those places, with those ideas, with those histories? And this is what we're all about at LSE, right? Which for us, when we talk about being international, is being able to say, oh, amazing people, we want you to bring your ideas, your perspectives, and as lame as it sounds, this is hard to say it. LSE is like a little mini United Nations of people who come from all around to talk. Right now, I won't kind of labor the point too much, but just to say that, people really do come from all around the world to study, and quite obviously a whole range, really, particularly people like you can see on the far right, that's the president of Taiwan. She studied at LSE. The current prime minister of Barbados studied at LSE, and even John F. Kennedy studied from places like this, from rooms like this, and Zoom rooms like that, right? To LSE, quite often take what they've learned with them back into, in particular, So if you were planning on coming to LSE to get away from Colombian people, so LSE Colombian students, any UK university, mostly on postgraduate degrees, across a whole range of different disciplines. And because we have such a part of our day-to-day society, the students who come from Colombia argue with each other, talk about home all the way in London. Similarly, it carries on. So actually in Colombia, we have a huge alumni network of what you're hoping to do and have come back. So you have this whole network of people who've also studied at LSE. Some of them are top lawyers, business owners, and they're there to support, but you can use them to kind of think maybe at this point, right? So definitely one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, we have so many outstanding students at LSE from Colombia is COLFUTURO, right? Which, as I said right at the start of this presentation, people in other countries are so angry they don't get this, right? So it's fantastic you're here and you're doing your research, because really what COLFUTURO offers is world leading, right? In terms of funding opportunities dollars for you to study outside of Colombia, either for a one-year master's or for now LSE almost 3,000 guarantee in the room I'm in, never mind the Zoom. I will be looking at people right now. So it's fantastic. And I won't talk too much about the details on this, but obviously this starts if you complete certain things, right? So if you return to Colombia within 2 years, and then if you work in like another 20%, and then if you do it at 20%, by the end, it might be that you only end up paying like 10,000 US dollars your whole master's degree, okay, which is then paid back over 7 years. And also at LSE, we have 2 full scholarships for so every single year paid for places at LSE who are on the COLFUTURO Semilleros program. So this is really world leading, and I would actually really recommend a resource where you can see every single person who's ever been, and this is from last year. You can see that in a single year, there were 62 people chosen for masters and PhD. That's insane, right? So it can help, I think, even give you ideas of like what you can study and what's out there, and it's really, really useful. Final thing I'll talk about before we talk about the masters and PhD programs is what comes after, which, hopefully you agree with me that education, it is an investment in your future, in the person you would like to, in the things. So when I use the word investment, I mean it in two ways. Everything costs something. And even if you get, a scholarship, the employment, so there's always going to be a cost, right, to pursuing education. But I think this is the fact that this is a whole year of your life. This is a whole year that you're giving up, where you're saying, I'm going to get up every single day to study, right? If you do a PhD, that's at least 3 years of your life you're giving up to do this thing. So I think if you're making this big investment of time and money, what's the return? What's on the other side? So what you can see on screen is a breakdown of UK universities. This is from last year's, and this ranks university prospects, i.e. how quickly people find jobs, average starting salary, and the quality of those jobs, right? And now I always love pointing out that LSE ranks higher than Oxford and Cambridge on those measures. This year, for the very, very first time ever, LSE University in the UK, the first time being ranked higher than Oxford and Cambridge, right? And in fact, the only cities there with higher graduate prospects, you might have already figured out, so you can fall out of bed and find a job as a doctor, right? Or as an engineer, right? So LSE is basically, okay? That reputation is true in the UK, but also all around. So in a recent survey, does a survey with employers, someone with Anders, someone with whatever, right? How do you see? And in that survey this year, LSE was ranked not in the UK but in the world in terms of employer reputation. So have a degree from LSE in places like LSE is that same level as Yale, right? Where that's the level we're talking about. And not, I won't labour the point too much, So we find that about 25% of everyone who graduates from LSE goes into kind of money jobs, right? Banking, finance, accountancy, whatever. But the majority, the 75%, go all over the place, right? So one of our biggest destination sectors for our graduates is in government. And actually, interestingly, not just local government, but international. So what I mean by that is, at LSE, every single year, we have a week where, in a single week, right, we have coming onto campus, the United Nations, World Health Organization, IMF, the EU, NATO, coming onto campus to meet our students, right? To talk about internships, to talk about grad schemes, to talk about job opportunities. We are the only UK university that can do this. We are the only one where all of these people want to come to our campus. And so, again, and I'm not going to, but, right? Every university that does it, Cambridge sends us, right? So this is to say that employers are interested in LSE students. There's lots of fantastic opportunities where we could say having LSE keeps your options, limits what you can do. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about information about postgraduate students. You have a sense of like what this might look like and what you should expect. Is that LSE just have one faculty. Within that faculty, we have about 25 different teaching departments, and each of these departments offers master's degrees, PhD. Again, because the UK is very specialist and LSE is very specialist even within that, there will be some subjects. So, for example, we're one of the very few universities in the world that offers economic history. But also we're one of the, as its whole postgraduate level, we also have things like gender studies, health policy, comms, policy. So this is just to say there are kind of lots of different ways to kind of come to LSE. And just mention that even thinking before Masters and PhD, we do have a summer school program as well. So every single summer, we offer 3 weeks at LSE, and main bachelor like law, economic, 3 weeks, practice your English, see London, and of course outside of the teaching, there is so like we take you obviously around London, you go to Stonehenge, all of those things, right, alongside. I remember some they might right because obviously it's a lot or a PhD for like 3 years. So some students will come to summer school apply for a master. Okay, but that was just my little plug. Sorry. Let's talk about then masters and PhD in detail. So across those 25 departments I mentioned, we have about 200 different masters and PhD programs. Okay? So I'm not a specific ones. Oh no. So as we've is the 9 months degrees are ones where you don't have to write. So if you come and do like accounting statistics, you're obviously not going to write research, right? It's going to be mainly exam based at 12 months because you have to write like a 10,000 or a 15,000 word research paper. Obviously, there'll be lectures where everyone debates, but also depending on what your study, there will also be other things on top of that. So we do a lot of work to make sure that our students, the knowledge they're gaining is useful, right, in some way. So for example, like a capstone project where you are paired up with some kind of firm or bank to look at some issue they're encountering, right? Or to look at the students are paired up with like a government department or a department in the EU, whatever, right? To look at a policy problem could be in law, education, could be in health, academic stuff, as well as stuff that's actually a little bit more real world focus, right? Put in the theory. Obviously, as we talked about, this is a big time commitment, at least 3 years. The reason it just depends on what subject you're in and what research is required, right? So if, like, for example, our history, international relations, politics students tend to be more like 4 or 5 years because of the way you have to do the research, as opposed to like data science, a little bit, you can do the research a little bit faster. But I guess, you have that big commitment. But the exciting thing is that at the end of that PhD, the world leading expert on whatever, the number one authority on whatever you need research. And I think PhD graduates will stay at LSE, teaching, doing, but also we actually have a lot of, so actually I learned the other day that I think the number one destination for people who graduate from PhD economics at LSE is actually the policy work. So again, you can do a PhD and stay in teaching, in academia. All this is different degrees at LSE. And like pretty much all of them are eligible. And so what I would say, go on our website, and at the top of the graduate study page, you'll see my recommendation would be search by things you're interested in, topics you're interested in, rather than going through everything. Right? Because I did this the other night. This is an example I'm interested in, and there's possibly 90 different degrees that you could take at LSE related to development. And I want to just point out something really quickly. So the way we normally work at LSE is there's normally one master's degree, which is very general. You can come and study, right? And that will give you the chance to do a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. But you can also see that we have ones that are more specialized on certain areas or certain disciplines. So for example, we have one that's international development from an economic policy perspective, right? So what you normally find is a mixture of degrees that are quite general a bit, and also ones that are depending on if you have pre-existing topics or things you already know that you're really interested in. When you then click into these, you can obviously read lots more. This is the most important bit of the page. Section called program structure, exactly what you're going to study on the masters. This is so important, obviously, not just for your research. You make sure you pick the right one for you, but this is so important for the application, right? So for everyone, please remember I've pointed this out because I'm going to bring it up program structure and courses. Okay. As I said at the start, I'm really sorry, but there is a cost to this, and the cost of the programs at LSE really varies. It can be anywhere between £16,000 and almost £45,000, right? That they really vary. Okay? Obviously, don't worry too much about that because we took more to that in a second. In terms of living costs, we think that to live a nice life in London, right, where you still live or whatever it is, right, you're going to need between 1,300 and 15. Now, obviously, to address a really common question, so yes, London can be a really expensive city, for sure. If you are going to expensive bars, expensive restaurants, expensive pubs, you will run out of money so quickly, right? I've made this mistake. Don't worry, right? Now, the experience. Living in London is definitely for sure. We talk about the cheaper student accommodation, free entry to things, student discounts on food, drinks, on events, activities, right? So there's loads of student. But also, as we've talked about, you have that part-time work opportunity as well. And most of our students are, you can work for up to 20 hours. Just to give you an example, right? So in our team at LSE, we hire students who help us do tours, send emails, and do events, and they are paid £17 an hour, right? That's a typical pay for a student. If let's just do work, £70 a week, that's £700 a month, right? Just from doing over half of your costs, sort of 10 hours part-time work, right? So this is just to say, again, new ways of making life a little bit easier. And to help with the finances. But of course, on top of this, right, there is a whole range of people who are desperate to give you money to study. Okay, so we've already talked about COLFUTURO and their mission and what they're hoping to achieve, and the loan they need related to COLFUTURO and what funding is Chevening. Okay, so Chevening is run, and they will fund every single year 1,500 scholarships for masters students to come to the UK. Right? 1,500. And they pay for everything. Tuition fees, living costs. So it's like you're studying scholarships available through tuition. The number changes every year. So, like for example, you'll understand why. Over the last 2 years, more scholarships have been given to Ukraine, as an example, one of the biggest recipients of achievement scholarships. And these are available on any master's degree at LSE, but that could also even be creative writing, right, at UCL or dance, right, at Queen Mary or whatever it is, right? This is available to anyone. So keep this in mind, and I would always follow the money. Apply to.
I have a question about the Chevening scholarship. I have in my mind that it's only for 1 year program. Is this correct?
Is normally just for 1 year program. Okay? One thing I didn't touch on there, which I'm going to add in now, is regarding kind of applying for scholarships, right? Because every scholarship provider will take a slightly different approach to when you should to COLFUTURO, right? So the COLFUTURO deadline is always COLFUTURO. You actually don't need to have a place yet at LSE, and then you COLFUTURO. Actually, you don't need to have a place yet at LSE. You can demonstrate you already got a place. Achieving is different, and that you must already have a place. So it means it might impact what time of year you should apply, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about the application timeline in a minute, but I just wanted to take this moment just to stress that every scholarship provider works a bit different. Some others might be a little bit more flexible. Now, on top of all that, LSE, we also have our own scholarships and bursaries that are open, again, to everyone, even if you've already received some funding from COLFUTURO or from achieving or from whatever. Now, I'm not going to go through everything we have because there's actually quite a lot, and you can see on the website. But what I would say is with LSE scholarships, the first thing is to get a place at LSE. Okay, so you need to apply, get a place, and then you can make an additional application for. It's actually really simple. So there's just one application. You put in some information, and then we will consider you for that. Okay, whether it's let me finish my point. Yeah. So some of our awards are based on need. Okay. So when we talk about need, doesn't mean, but it would mean that let's say you came to us and you said, "Okay, I've got this money from COLFUTURO. I've got this money from my mum and dad. I've got this money in savings, right? But I'm still going to be short of like 5K." That's where something like the graduate support scheme might step in. But equally, the nationality, what subject you're going to be studying. So law students, for example, there's a law scholarship, there's an economic scholarship. So there's all kinds of factors that go in to allocating the scholarships. But it's all. Did you have a question?
As you were saying, sorry, as you were saying, one often tries to apply to all of them all at once. And since the Chevening scholarship is cast in August regularly, normally the time for applying to the LSE scholarship will be over by that time. So if we get into the apply to LSE and get into and after that apply to at LSE scholarship, it may reduce your chances of getting a Chevening scholarship, or can be something trouble.
Yeah. So in regards to the scholarships, your chances of getting money from LSE are higher if you're able to demonstrate. Okay. So actually, it's the kind of reverse of what you said. So let's say you apply to Achieving, apply to COLFUTURO, apply to ISITEX, and none of them give you any money. I don't know what you said to them, what you did, but none of them want to give you any money, right? When you report, that obviously needs before, right? So actually, the way of thinking about it is, yeah, apply to as much as you can. You can pull in different places, but in terms of getting money from LSE, if you can demonstrate you've tried all the options. Final thing I'll just say on this is, when you get, if you Google Study UK Scholarship Finder by the British Council, that lists every single scholarship at every single your nationality, by what you want to study, your level of study, and they will give you a list of everything you're eligible for. Therefore, when we talk about like all the options and all the things you can apply for, you will have a list of that. Now, what I will say is, obviously, we want you to come to LSE, right? But if you see that there is a scholarship at King's College for a Colombian student who wants to study politics, right? Just because I think, again, with postgraduate study, It is a bit of a hustle, right? And you follow the money, you apply to as much as you can, particularly at PhD level. So where I want to finish on, because I've already been speaking for almost an hour, is the hard, which is, it's all really nice for me to say all of this. And COLFUTURO has had this brilliant scholarship offer. The hard thing is actually getting in. Right? So let's some of the questions about timing. So applying to LSE, my website, set up an account. Applications, ignore what it says on my slide. Applications will always open in. So if you want to start at LSE next year, your applications, there is a fee to applying to LSE, which is currently £95. If that fee is going to be a problem, it is possible to get that waived. You just need to give us the reason, okay? If you need a bit of different programs, same application. Okay, so keep in what people do is they might have their first choice, as we're talking about, that's like perfect for them. And then their second choice might be a more general degree, right? In the same kind of area, might be a bit broader. University transcript, obviously. We obviously need to know how you've done in your bachelor's study and if in university, right? We then need something called a statement of purpose, which I'm going to come back to. We need a CV, so we need to know your job history, work experience, if you've got any, okay? So we can see kind of where you're at in your life. And also 2 references. Now, as it says on screen, we have a preference. The reason being, of course, is you're coming to LSE to be a student. So people who've seen you as a student are the best place to comment on what you're probably going to be like. That said, okay, if you let, we know that most of your professors are probably dead, right, at this point, right? Or they, and so it is up to you who you nominate. I think it's far more appropriate to include work references if you have been out of university for 3 years. Or let's say you're applying for something where you already work in that field of law and you work as a lawyer, right? It makes sense. The final piece of advice on references, don't try and get some. So people think that if they get like a really famous academic or like a president, prime minister, pick people, because I promise you, every single year you get applications to LSE, and I swear to God, right, when we get the references, get this every year, we get references that say, I have, because people like will pick the dean or the head of the school because they think it's going to be better, or to ask your manager or whoever it is, right? They on top of that, so for a number of our degrees, we'll also, if you don't know what this is, don't worry. This is a standardized like grad school test. Lots of universities use it. We tend to use these just for our sort of slightly more corporate MBA type programs. So things like economics, finance, and management. There's not a need to provide it. And then for PhD applicants, without a doubt, 4 or 5 or 6 years, we need is the research proposal, where you outline what you want to research, where the gaps in the literature are, what resources you're going to use. This is really important. There is no deadline, so I cannot close. That means that some master's degrees close way, way earlier than others because they're way more popular. People apply earlier. So this would be my advice. Apply before January. Okay? So apply between first, all programs will happen. Right? Or to be considered for LSE scholarships is in April, right? And so let's say you applied in January, you will definitely still be in time to be considered for scholarships. Right? And also it gives you more time to apply for accommodation. It gives you between October and January. We'll be able to apply later than that. Accommodation.
Sorry for so many questions, but I've been granted with a COLFUTURO loan scholarship, and I applied in June to a master's programming. Yeah, for starting September this year, and I was rejected, and I can imagine that it must be for the date of application. But I'm wondering if it's better to do my application all over again from scratch, or if it's better to reinstate my application for next year.
Advice of some things to do in your application. What I'm hoping will happen is you're going to listen to what I say and you say, hey, that's what I should have done, right? So bear with me, but entry point, right? So obviously it's at LSE. And so what you can see on screen is our entry requirements. These are minimum, so some degrees are a little bit higher. And when you go on our website, you'll see that we always talk in terms of course, in terms of the UK grading system. Now, if you have never met the UK grading system before, please don't try and understand it now. It makes like the highest grade you can get. Okay, so what I've done is to try and make life easy, as I've just put the translation on screen of what this would be from a Colombian university. And then let's say you didn't study a country in the world just by Googling LSE and then like the name of the country you're in. So LSE USA, LSE. Normally for the master's degree before you start PhD. Okay, that's there is also important. Obviously we need evidence of this. So IELTS. The big thing to stress is you do not need this, the English language, when you apply, right? So we on language skills. We purely make those decisions on you as a student, your academic profile. So what would happen is if you've already got a test, amazing, send us the result, right? But if you haven't yet got a test, all that would be different for you is we would say, great, before you start, right, to show you're at the right level. And by the way, the reason we do that is it's not just we are also the people that approve your visa. Right? So we have to have enough. So even if we're being difficult, even if it's
Yeah, so I have a question regarding the entry requirements. So I'm interested in a master in local economic development. And in the requirements, they mentioned that is required a social science degree. So I studied business administration. So I don't know if that like fall into that category or not.
there about like what we and I think one of the points it's a really good question because UK education system is people who might start off studying can swap over to like finance. So some you have done, right? But just to give you an even more of an example of this, okay? So I had some, he is a rocket scientist, right? And he was coming in economic and he says, but I'm really worried. It's absolutely fine. Like it's more about your skills. We're not expecting, right? The reason now there are some exceptions, so things like the masters in law. It's we're quite open-minded. Just to for the last enjoy their lives. This is the slightly scary bit. So we are, I'm very fortunate in that I get to travel all around the world, and I was going to say sadly, not sadly, sadly, many people want to come to us, right? Many people are attracted by what we have, and they think it's going to be good for them. And so every year, we have way more applications. You can see that last year we had 45,000 applications for about 4,500 places. So when someone in the room says they weren't successful last year, that doesn't mean you're a bad student, right? That means that 1 in 10 people applying gets the place, right? Now, where it might be 15 applications per place is not to try and intimidate you, right? Although I can see from some faces in the room, I can't see you on Zoom, but some faces in the room, I may have achieved that. Apologies. The reason, which is, I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell them this, but I am. Last year, of those 45,000 applications, okay, 80% of all of those had this. So is a really good student, right? It's got a strong academic background. Everyone applying, like basically everyone applying is amazing. And I cannot stress this enough, grades are not the main thing we care about, right? Because basically you've got slightly high, because the reason is because that's what we think you need to be successful. 3.8 in your bachelor's, you are good, right? So anything, once we've just done that initial look through at the grade is everything else together. And with is the statement of academic purpose. Without a doubt, okay? Because that is your chance for your voice to come through to the LSE admission, and they are experts in what they are talking about. Say they have PhDs or they have taught in the subjects you're applying to. Okay, so they know what they're talking about. So just to end then with the statement. So the statement of academic purpose is a 2-page document. Okay? When you do not do it, right? 2 pages. That's it. 3, 4. We've asked for 2. Give us 2. This, though, is a very different kind of document to what you will write if, for example, you apply to the USA, right? That's the starting. Want to know about your ethos, and they want to know what your life, what your cat's called. And I'm not saying we don't care. Within, obviously, we know study. You might be thinking about your career. You might be thinking about opportunities as a student. Okay, so at least 80% of this document needs to be academic, explaining why you want to study this specific degree. So what we get a lot of is that there's a million, what about this one? We're not right fit. So here would be when you're doing your research, have a look in the programs of all of the topics and the modules that you're going to do in that master's degree, right? And then when you come to writing your personal statement, all of it, at some point in the statement, okay? So for example, let's say you want to come and study, let's say you want to come and study, you would look at the breakdown of the program and you would see, okay, I'm going to have to do corporate assets as one of the modules in finance, right? Then what you might do is write a section of the statement saying, I can see that I'm going to study corporate assets. Here's why this is really interesting to me. Here's some of the things I'd like to. I read this book recently on the topic and it made me think this, right? Great. And then your next paragraph might be, oh, I can see we also have to study macroeconomics, of course. Here's all the things I already know about macroeconomics. Here's some things I did. Do you see what you're doing there? You are showing us not just that you're a smart person with ideas and good experiences, why you are the right person for this course, right? So it's really important to be specific, to be detailed. You can name academics, you can name the books you really want to read. Like you can be nerdy in this. But it's about being precise, right, with your reasoning. And it will impress our selectors way, way more to do that. Than if you, while I was saying, a few hands appeared around the room. Do people have questions on this before? Question right at the back of the room.
I wanted to ask you, is it good that we include forward-looking statements in this essay? Sometimes universities or perhaps scholarships, they like to hear, I see myself in 5 years as the ministers of something. So is that a good thing? Would that help?
So we appreciate that obviously like at master's level in particular, you're gonna obviously be thinking more about your career and like next steps and where you want this to take you. Don't make it the focus, okay? So it's perfectly okay to talk about those kind of things, but I would say that is in the 20% you can see there, okay? So basically 80% is all about the course, all about your motivation, your interests. The 20% is where you would talk about things like that, which are great and you can tell us, right? But it's not the focus, okay? Because ultimately as well, keep in mind at the end of the day, so much what happens after you leave. And I know that sounds like a cruel thing, but what I mean to say is, we're thinking about, for that year you're with us, why should we want you in our classroom, right? So yes, you can talk about career stuff and aspirations and like future vision of yourselves, which is whether any.
So master, so we need to mention both in the same.
So yes, if you are applying for 2 programs, which you can upload 2 different statements, even if you copy bits from one to the other, that's fine. Always tailor it. Because even if you apply for programs that sound really similar, we'll be looking to see that you understand the difference, that you understand what you're applying to. So yeah, you can do your CV if you really wanted to, if you wanted to really tailor your CV. Okay, I will have a quick look. Is there any questions? I'll come to questions on Zoom in just a second. So what I want to do is I will leave that there because that's a lot of information. Hopefully that's been useful to give you a bit of an overview of the application. And I appreciate we're on 7:30, and I said I wasn't going to speak for this long. That's my fault. Take a few in the room to start with, and then I will have a look on Zoom to see what's been coming in. So yeah.
I would like to know if there's any specific format for the CV. Yeah.
CV, there's no specific format. Sensible means either 1 page or 2 pages. Do not send us more than 2 pages. We'll go insane. Right. And keep in mind as well, things like with the CV, you don't really need to talk about your education history. Why? Because we've got it. You've already sent it us in the application. You've sent us your transcripts or whatever. I would suggest the best possible way to think about the CV is use it to mention everything you can't really put anywhere else, right? So if you've got some really good work experience, but that just isn't related to the course, I wouldn't be putting it in the statement. I'd be putting it in the CV. Does that make sense? So there's no, there's no specific guidance on the CV. General good CV advice. I normally put in the CV like much elsewhere. Okay.
So I have another question regarding the number of places available, because I was checking the figures that are visible in the webpage, and for some masters, the intake is like 18 for 200 applicants, and for other masters, it's like intake 98 maybe. So I want to know if there is any specific logic of how exactly that works.
So it just depends on the class size, right? So some classes attract more, are bigger than others. Some courses are smaller than others. I think our biggest master's degree is the Master's in Law, which is about 150 students each year. But no, so there's no conspiracy behind it. It's just how big is the class? How many students do we take each year? And that will obviously impact the applicant to success, right?
Regarding the academic references, you said like you prefer that if we did like an internship, do you think that's a good idea to have a reference from my manager in the internship?
Yeah, so I think the question was kind of about, again, about references. The references are yours, what the best thing is going to be for you. I think academic, again, our default advice is academic is best. But if you've done an internship in something that is directly related to what you want to do at LSE, great. If we were unhappy with a reference for whatever reason, you wouldn't be rejected, we'd ask for another. So if we really felt strongly that the referee you'd chosen isn't the right fit for this particular applicant, you're not going to be rejected. We would ask you to nominate someone else. Okay. So the worst that can happen is we'll ask for another.
So I have two questions. One, I think it's pretty more straightforward. So
Okay.
first, is there an age average of the master's degree students that LSE has? I'm guessing it depends on the field, but perhaps there's an average over a work experience
Okay.
in years average, perhaps. And the second one would be, what's the best way for me to get in contact with one of the graduate from the program I'm interested in?
Okay, two really good questions. So work experience, first of all. There's a small number of degrees at LSE that will require work experience. Two big examples are the Masters of Public Policy and the Masters of Public Administration, which are geared towards like mid-career professionals. So they will say you need 5 years experience, right? But the majority of our programs do not have a minimum expectation on that. So we will get students who are coming straight from a bachelor's degree, who are 21 years old, right? We will get people who've had a little break from education and come to us at 25. We even get people who have retired and are just doing a master's degree for fun, right? So there isn't a minimum expectation. I can't give you an average. And it's something that if you've got work experience, we will consider it absolutely as part of your application. But it's not a requirement. That's the second from LSE. We don't sadly have like a database that I can give you of like loads of emails or anything like that. My advice would be obviously one, LinkedIn is your friend. And two, actually the Alumni Society in Colombia is really active. They are really just helpful and nice. And like, I would say, I think they're on Instagram, they're definitely on LinkedIn. Send them a message and just say like, I'm thinking of applying to LSE. Is anyone like from this? And I think they probably will.
Nathan, we have someone in the chat online that wants to ask something, so.
Absolutely. So I'll take a few questions from the chat first. I can see two from Juan. Thank you so much for being here, Juan, and for asking your questions. So first question from Juan is, if you get an offer from, can I ask for a deferral? Really good question. So if you get a place at LSE, we don't grant deferrals unless it is a really compelling situation. That normally means medical reasons or like very personal family reasons. We would grant a deferral. And that's because we want each year to be fair to the people applying to that year. So if we have 20 people who defer a place to the next year, that means there's 20 less places for everyone applying in that year. So we want to be fair. However, what we can do is reinstate your application. Now, reinstating your application means that you are considered again the next year. But what I would say, if you've been accepted once, even if you didn't change a single word of the application, I would suggest the chances are very good you would get the offer again. That is without you changing anything. And obviously you might want to go in and improve a few bits, add a few things. So the short answer, Juan, is you can't defer, or it's very unlikely we would delay or reinstate your application. There's a question as well from Juan about deposits. Okay. So Juan, if there's a couple of degrees at LSE that do require a deposit in order to secure your place, this mainly is things like finance, where they ask for a deposit. But I appreciate that if you are applying through COLFUTURO, obviously you might well be waiting for money from it. What I would recommend in this place, Juan, is, as you suggested, to ask for a waiver on that until you have a final confirmation of where your funding is coming from. Like, we're not monsters. We understand that people have pressing needs and different financial circumstances. So generally speaking, it's possible to ask for a waiver. And I think this is a perfect example of a situation where that would make sense. Okay, I've already answered about documents. So just to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, that question. Sorry, with my Spanish, am I understanding that correctly? So that's when because it's just one semester entry to LSE? No, sorry. Yeah. 2025.
Because the first one is someone regarding the recording. So yes, we will check the recording. The second one is which are the documents for the admission process, right?
Yeah.
If he wants to apply to 2025 during the second semester, when someone who wants to start a program during the second semester of 2025 should apply.
Okay. So there's only one starting point at LSE, which is we always start in September. So there's no January intake or anything like that. So yeah, I think we've already covered that. So in terms of applications, you are going to be applying to LSE from October. And then I would encourage you to try and get an application in before January would be my advice, although it would you might be able to apply afterwards. So a few questions from Camillo as well. So can we ask a waiver for the admission fee? Yes, short answer is yes. So normally it costs £95 to be considered, but we do accept waivers if you send us a request, LLM. Okay, so I think this is in regard to English language. So one of the slightly annoying things that we do is with English language tests, we look at the overall score, but also the individual components. So we obviously do that because you could get a really good overall score, but your writing could be dreadful, in which case, obviously, you're really going to struggle at LSE. So in terms of our entry requirements, we will share online what you need to get overall, but also in the individual sections. And sadly, it is a case of like, that is what you need to achieve. So if you fall beneath, there's a possibility we'll ask you to resit, even if it's close. But again, we're not monsters, and there is a process for those conditions being waived. So for example, if you are like 1 point below in one section and otherwise are amazing across IELTS or what, like TOEFL or Cambridge or whatever, you can request for a special consideration, and we may well, let you in on that test. Or in some cases, we also will allow students to do like pre-sessional English courses. If we feel they need additional work in certain areas, it might be that we say, okay, great, we will accept that test, but you need to arrive a couple of weeks early to do some English writing practice.
More questions?
I have a question related to that. If I don't know if the LSE accept my best scores in the TOEFL.
Yes.
Okay.
We do.
And the second one is related to the double degree of the MPA.
Yeah.
Between Colombia and LSE. I don't know what are the options of funding or scholarship in that program.
Okay, good questions. So yes, the first bit was about the English language. That's absolutely fine. So we accept the one skill retake and my best take, a few things like that. Okay, so you can have a look on that on our website. But in terms of funding for dual degrees, this gets interesting. because it will be different depending on the country you're in. Okay, so for example, if the first year of a dual degree is in the UK, right, you'll probably be eligible for Achieving, but just for that year, right? Does that make sense? So then you'd be looking at alternative funding potentially for the second year. Now, COLFUTURO is happy, right, to fund multi-year degrees, but it will never increase the overall amount of money that you receive. So even if you applied for COLFUTURO for a 2-year degree, you still are going to get the maximum that would be up to you to figure out 2 years. So it's a really complicated area because while you're at LSE, you'll be eligible for LSE funding. While you're at Columbia, you'll be eligible for a whole different set of funding that I have no idea about, right? So I'm sorry to be a bit escapist, but I would say everything I've said about LSE applies, but then you'd also need to do a bit of extra research on what would work in the US. But there are options, right? There's a very similar thing to Achieving for US students and things like that.
Okay, I got a question about the references. For example, if I have 2 references from my university degree, but they are not related to the master's in a direct way.
Yeah.
For example, one is public economy and the other is research.
Yeah.
But in my background, my work experience background, I work in research. I can use my work reference as an academic reference.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, because I know there's so many questions about the references, I'm going to explain to you the part that you will never see, okay, with the references, with what it looks like for a referee, okay? So when you apply to LSE, all you do is you put in a name and an email address of who is going to be your referee, okay? That will be the only thing you ever do with your references. You will never see the references, right? So let me explain what it looks like if you're a referee. So if you're a referee who gets nominated by someone, you will get an email from LSE, and that email will send you to an online survey. Right? The first part of that online survey will ask really basic questions about you as a student. Okay? Do you think this person is the right academic level for LSE? Does this person turn up for time for class, right? Do you think this person has the adequate research skills to succeed at LSE? These kind of things, right? So really general questions about you as a student. The second part is then when they can then upload a letter with more detail about you, okay? So the reason I'm telling you all this is, yes, for the first part, it could be anyone. It could be any kind of class teacher, right? That's fine. For the second part, it makes more sense if someone is talking about you from the discipline or the background, right, that you want to go into. So again, there's no perfect. Send them your statement of academic purpose, right? Send them the statement so they know what's motivating you. They can comment and pull things out of your statement, and also tell them what you want them to say, right? So when I applied to my master's, it was in history, and one of my referees, he used to work at LSE, but then he moved to a university in Canada. And I emailed him and he was like, yeah. And I said to him, oh, Pedrick, do you remember that really good essay I wrote, right? In which I got this really amazing grade, right? And he went, oh, yeah, right? And then now I shouldn't probably say this because I'm a member of LSE staff, I can look at the reference. What was mentioned in the reference, okay? Those things that I'd asked to be mentioned. So there's no perfect answer to this. And that's why I think maybe best to kind of don't worry too much about the references. Pick people who are sensible for your situation, and also please do provide them with information about your motivation. And if you want them to say something, tell them, because in most cases that makes their life easier because they're not having to think as much about what to write in the reference. Okay, yeah, of course. So a couple more questions online. So a question about scores in GMAT, is that right? Yeah, so in terms of GMAT GRE scores, we don't have a minimum score you need to achieve alongside the other aspects of your application. So what I can say though is we would consider an LSAT score to be, and a good GRE score to be, think over 170 off the top of my head with that. There's no minimum.
The question was related to the programs that require.
Oh,
the
sorry,
GRE,
okay.
the GRE. So
Sorry,
there is
sorry.
a website.
When you, the first thing you'll see when you look at the programs is a box that says requirements, and there is a yes or no box that says, do you need GMAT? So that'll be one of the very first things when you do your research. In terms of these other questions, so degrees, Alejandro, you can submit 2 different statements. And then in terms of, I think we've spoken quite a lot about the references, right? So let's leave that. Sebastian, hi Sebastian, you're an architect. Thank you for being here. So this is an interesting question because, again, this goes back to like people changing career direction, and this is a lot more possible, I think, in the UK than other places. So, what I would always say, Sebastian, answer to your question, but also to similar questions like this is, if you are worried about something in your application, i.e., whether my degree is a social science, or because I'm an architect, I've not got experience in this, or I don't think I did enough macroeconomics in my degree at university, whatever, talk about it. The best thing you can do in an application is talk about anything you're worried about, right? So if you don't think, in your case, I think it was Sebastian, that you are going to be a qualified candidate because you're an architect, talk about that and tell us why we should want you. Right? Tell us what makes you fantastic. And now that space engineer who works at NASA obviously isn't going to be able to talk about all of his experience in finance. But what he can do is say, yeah, but look at the amazing skills I've got in maths, right? Which are going to fit so perfectly on your course. So actually, yeah, LSE has architects, has engineers, has creative thinkers, right? Who come from all kinds of backgrounds. Talk about that. It's one of your strengths, not a weakness. And so don't hide from those things. Talk about those things. Now, at the end of the day, we could still turn around and say, you're just not qualified for that degree because you need a certain background. So my advice would be, if you are applying for something like Masters in Economics, which I think was mentioned in the question, apply for something with slightly easier entry requirements as well, where we don't necessarily require a certain amount of quantitative background. Okay, and then we can see if there's any more in the room. So, Jose, about the dual degree. So I think I've already touched on some of this. So if you are taking a dual degree, whichever year you're at LSE, you'll be eligible for LSE funding, and whichever year you're at another university, you will be eligible for. So, in regards to the graduate UK visa, generally speaking, and there's one exception I know of to this, so I have to be really careful, you are still going to be eligible for the graduate visa because it's a dual degree. You are still going to get a full degree from LSE from this, meaning you have met that requirement of studying in the UK for 12 months and getting a degree. So even if you then do a year at Berkeley or Columbia or whatever it is and come back to the UK, you should still be able to put yourself forward for the graduate visa, okay? Even if you have like a year break. The one exception to that is there's a degree in Masters in Media and Communications with a university in the US that isn't eligible. But to the best of my knowledge, every other dual degree would be absolutely fine. But again, be careful on your research with this, okay? Be really, really careful. I'm not legally allowed to give you advice on this because if I mess this up, I do not want you knocking on my door to tell me I've ruined your life. So the best advice I can give is, generally speaking, you should be okay, but please be careful doing your research. And if that's really important to you, obviously avoid the degrees where you might not be eligible. Final question on Zoom from Alejandro again. Should we include a possible dissertation topic in our statement? Really good question. I did. It's not essential, but if you already have a rough idea of what you think you would like to do your dissertation on, yes, you can talk about that in the application. Not essential. It's also not binding. So when you get to LSE, if you realize it's a crap idea or there's something else way more interesting, you can change. But actually, I remember, yeah, so in my application, I said my dissertation topic was going to be this, and it turned out to be something completely different. But again, it's just more about showing us like why we should want you, like, are you going to be a good fit? You know, does your research sound interesting? let's do that one final one. So I'll have to start wrapping up questions from Juan. So how much time do you have to provide English proficiency tests? There is no time limit on sending us an English test. The thing will be, the later you leave it, the more likely you are to delay arriving at LSE, because you cannot get your student visa until we've got all your documents. So what that means is you could technically send us your English test result on the first day of September when you're due to start studying, like 2 weeks later. But then you would have to wait for us to approve your visa, go to the Visa and Immigration Centre, complete the visa application form. So you're probably going to turn up late. So Juan, there is no time limit other than, again, your personal timeline and your ability to get things done in time to get started.
So we are going to finish the session for the people that is online. And thank you so much for joining us. Voy a hablar en español esta parte y es recordarles a todos que COLFUTURO el primer viernes de cada mes y el segundo sábado de cada mes tiene la charla informativa en la que explicamos en qué consiste el esquema de financiación. Los invitamos a que participen en esas sesiones informativas y a quienes nos acompañaron en línea, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Esperamos seguir participando en estas actividades. El primer viernes de cada mes a las 8 de la mañana y el segundo sábado de cada mes a las 9:30. Son en línea. Solo tienes que ingresar a la página de COLFUTURO y ahí encuentras el enlace donde dice eventos en vivo.